All right. Hi, everyone. This is Masters of Podcasting. I'm Melissa.
I'm Conley.
And today we're going to talk about episode 3, Standard Deviation.
Woo!
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I remember this episode as being much more boring than it actually turned out to be.
I felt exactly the same way. I remember distinctly on the rewatch going, oh, this is like not a table setting episode exactly, but it was one where you're just like, oh, I don't remember what happens in this one. Or, it doesn't have like a big, in my mind anyway, big punctuation mark or anything. But it turned out to be a lot better than I thought it was going to be, and it was much less of a chore on the rewatch. So I actually really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, it was funny because, like you said, there wasn't anything in particular that stood out to me in this episode.
Besides the prostitutes, screaming at the top of their lungs, that was pretty much the one thing that I could point to be like, yeah, that's what this episode is about.
Well, between that and everything that happened, it was like it was so jam-packed, my brain just said, you know what? This whole thing is a wash.
Yeah, exactly. So we start out in a flashback that kind of surprised me, honestly. I didn't know what kind of narrative device the show was going to use to talk about their respective pasts, but Bill and Scully watching bunnies get it on in 1945. And what did you think of the contrast between past Bill and present Bill that we kind of got now?
Well, I thought it was interesting just for him as a character. You know, you see him and he's so much more, not necessarily wild, but almost sort of ADD in that, you know, he's got this one specific interest, but it's just, he's all over the place and he's not as reserved, he's nowhere near as collected and measured as he is in the present day.
And it kind of made me wonder, like, what happened in those intervening years? Did his enthusiasm didn't dull exactly because he's still just as passionate and obsessed with it, but it's kind of like you can see that he's worn down by the very process of being forced to just age up, like in order just to have the respectability, which is really too bad because when he was younger, it was, so, I don't know, if younger Bill and Virginia had been working together, it would have been just like crazy. It would have been so out there, and they would have both been so excited. And I feel like their relationship with each other, not physical or sexual, just like their interaction would have been so kind of more on the same level. But I feel like in present times, Gini kind of is going to start bringing that excitement to it, and he's just gonna kind of be like, yes, this is the fulfillment of my life's work. So his enthusiasm was nice to see.
I think my favorite part too was just seeing the contrast between Scully and Bill. I just thought that was hilarious because it gives you, again, such good senses, not only of their characters then, but that sort of dynamic that's continued into the present. One of the things that I wrote down for that scene was, you know, here's Scully just sort of tossing out all these witty one-liners.
He gets the best one-liners.
It cracked me up because, you know, one of the things that young Bill says is, you know, I don't know anything about sex. You don't know anything about sex. Wouldn't you like to? And it just, you know, here you have these two men who, through whatever circumstances, have very different attitudes to sex and to the people that eventually become their sexual partners. So
yeah, it was just fun seeing Michael Sheen get to have his hair styled like a crazy person, all poofed up and funny. And I really hope that they kind of bring that back as not a full-time thing, but like disheveled Bill is kind of a marker of a return to enthusiasm during certain key points, you know, during appropriate stages of disarray, I guess. And then we had that lovely cameo from Mae Whitman, and the president when he's cynical and confronted with these sadly ignorant patients, which is too bad. I kind of got the feeling that that's, you know, worn him down over time, and he mentions that, you know, there's kind of a few callbacks, I guess, to the idea of his patients just not knowing anything throughout the next few episodes.
It was really interesting, just not necessarily seeing the dynamic, but you really get to see, I guess, Bill's sort of bedside manner in this episode. It's not just, I'm a doctor and I research, or I am here doing surgery, but it's really him interacting with his patients in a way that we haven't seen before.
Well, and I'd contrast this with a couple of episodes from now, I think, where, and I think this episode has some varying differences in his bedside manner, because I don't think he's entirely cold, because there's one episode where he interacts with a woman, and we won't talk about it right now, but it's a totally different matter. Like, he's a totally different person to her. And so it just shows that he's not consistently the cold, stern doctor. I mean, he approaches that and he's very close to it, but I think it's a lot of times it's a reaction to the specific patient. Like this college girl and just her total ignorance is exasperating to him.
But he does a good job of pushing that aside with this particular patient and saying, okay, you don't know anything. I'm about to drop some knowledge.
Yeah, he drops the knowledge bombs, and they're a little overwhelming for her, but that was funny. Then he is confronted with Betty.
My question to you, did you think the Pretzel King was a real person? Like, did you think this was something that was actually going to happen by episode's end?
I wasn't sure. I wasn't quite sure if she was telling the truth or not, but when Gene finally showed up, the only thing I could think was how he looks exactly like Alan Sherman to me, who was a famous satirist and he did musical comedy performances. He would take famous songs and rewrite the lyrics. He did Hello Mutta, Hello Fada, Here I Am from Camp Granada. He did that song. As far as whether or not he really existed, I don't know. I think I just sort of assumed that Betty was telling the truth. What did you think?
I honestly was on the fence about it. And it was funny when he first appeared because the actor, Greg Grunberg, was in Felicity and an Alias for a long time, so I just remember him as Agent Sean from the TWOP recaps. But it was just, I wasn't really sure if the show was going to go to a kind of hallucinogenic place where, Betty was dying of some tragic disease and, the Pretzel King was some figment of her imagination.
Oh, wow.
Or if it was just, I don't know. I've watched too many sort of soapy medical dramas to fully trust in his existence. So then when he showed up, it was a nice surprise.
That's interesting. That would have been considering what the kind of almost leaning on that hallucinogenic, incidents that this show kind of gets into later. Actually, that seems like that would almost fit in a way, but maybe the show is still kind of finding its feet.
Well, and I'm glad they didn't go that way because that would have been much less interesting.
So then I want to talk about, skipping ahead a little bit, Ginny goes back to the brothel, and she's working with Bill now, and she has this incident in the living room where John comes in and makes some remark at her, and she, just sort of brushes him off, but Bill just turns around and stares at them, and what I really love about the framing of that shot is that he's staring at Virginia with this, kind of terrified and yet possessive expression. And at the same time, if you look on the opposite side of the frame, Betty is watching him very carefully.
I missed that.
She's watching him so intently with this really interested expression. She knows exactly what's going on. She can see it. But I just love that the camera kind of lingers on, and he doesn't turn around all the way. Bill just kind of flips. He almost gets whiplash in a way. He whips his head around so fast and is just ready to just knock this guy over to get him away from Virginia. It's just it's a nice little moment.
I really appreciated it at the end of the episode when Betty kind of calls Ginny on this whole dynamic that's been created, just saying, obviously, he's in love with you and you follow him around like a Cocker Spaniel, and Ginny kind of gets her hackles up and says, well, that's not true, even though, like you said, we've seen all these little scenes where, he's really starting to feel possessive of her and really have those intense emotions for her.
So, and I think Betty really relishes the moment, kind of in a high school or middle school kind of way. She enjoys riling Ginny up and kind of winding her up in that way. Does she think that that it's a two-way street, that it's reciprocated, or is she just trying to start something with Ginny? Is she just stirring up shit? Because she and Ginny both know that Ginny is not just a Cocker Spaniel or an assistant. She said in the previous episode, he should pay you so much more. She's perfectly aware that Ginny's job and her passion for her job go well above and beyond just what's on paper as her job. So I kind of wonder what Betty's ulterior motive there is. It was a little murky, her intentions there, but it was curious.
You compare it to a sort of middle school, high school girl interaction. I didn't see it as being malicious in intent, but I think Betty definitely had a sort of sly subtext there, because if you see someone looking at Ginny the way that Bill looked at Ginny in the brothel and she so clearly observed that, then, she's probably, the next thing she's going to do is go up to Ginny and say, hey, I saw Bill looking at you. He looks at you. Do you know that? What do you think about that?
It was kind of, yeah, it's kind of that I'm going to get a kick out of embarrassing you and drawing your attention to this, and ooh, maybe something will
Right.
come of this, and the next, when I catch you two having an affair in a hotel, wink wink,
Then I'm going to be
then
so
I'm going to
happy.
nudge you in the ribs and say, haha, called it.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So then they get into the interviews and the trials. Well, first they get into the interviews. Maureen is the first one up, the curly-haired Nicole Tom, and we pronounced her name wrong last time. Sorry.
That was my bad.
That's okay. And Bill just completely refuses to go off the script of the questions that he has that are clearly like fertility questions for his patients at the hospital. He hasn't reworked these. He hasn't thought about them at all. Do we think that Bill is just plain oblivious, or is he, I thought he was kind of aware of just how short-sighted the questions are, and he just goes with what he knows?
Yeah, I don't think he really, I guess, had a sort of second script that he could have deployed at that point. It was just sort of, well, these aren't perfect, but they're definitely a working model, and we don't really need perfect questions anyway. While Jenny was, watching him read those off, and she and Maureen were looking at each other like, does he know what he's saying?
Yeah, because he doesn't have an expression like he totally expects her to answer seriously. I mean, he's just kind of like, yeah, I'm just going to ask this question and see what she says. It's almost like he has this adorably dorky look on his face throughout the whole thing. And I have in my notes, like he's out bird watching or trying to adjust his telescope to get the best possible look at a distant star. He is so, so removed from any of this that it doesn't even embarrass him that the question is so obviously, not tailored for this group of people.
And like you said, I mean, I don't think it really entered his mind, this is something I will need to change. It's just, these are the rote questions. I'll go ahead and ask them.
And I think there's kind of a callback to that later on after the male prostitutes, and we can get into that in a second, but when he kind of sits down in the bed and has that moment of, I really don't know what we're going to do next, I think that's kind of a theme for him. Bill is very, very smart, but he doesn't think as creatively maybe as Virginia will probably prove to, and his intelligence just goes more toward a very specific, dedicated thing, whereas she's probably more expansive, I guess. So it surprised me that he was willing to tell her that he didn't know what they were going to do. I think he just kind of depends on, well, this is how I've always done it. I mean, this is how it's done. Why would I do it any other way? I think that's going to prove to be an interesting part of their dynamic.
When they get to the actual field testing, those scenes cracking me up because one, with Maureen and the fake orgasm, I kept thinking of this scene from Seinfeld where Elaine says that she's faked orgasms before, and Jerry and George are just aghast, but what about the breathing, the moaning, the panting, the screaming? Fake, 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 fake. What did you think about the scene with Ginger?
Okay, I know it's played for laughs, but that actually, it made me wonder, given what we find out about Bill's family history, what he's really thinking, having to hit this woman.
Interesting. I did not consider that.
It concerned me. I mean, I know it's, yeah, and Ginny's reaction is really funny because she's trying so hard not to just break down and just start laughing so hard that she's crying, but I don't know, he really doesn't, you don't get the perception of that from Bill himself. He doesn't look uncomfortable beyond the aspect of having to spank this woman he doesn't know.
Right.
For this, illicit purpose. But at the same time, I don't know. And there are little things throughout the first season, and granted, we don't really get details about the history of his abuse, but there were other little things. And there's something later on, with Anchor Girls, who we're talking about. So
right.
she describes, and this is later after they come back with Ginny's, she's so proud of this, reworked question. And the first one she asked right off the bat, it comes out that this girl was, sexually molested by a relative. She was raped for years. And we really get clear reactions from both Bill and Virginia. And Bill just looks both mortified and like he kind of not relates to it specifically, but he's just like, yeah, I can.
There's a shadow on his face in particular. You know, Jenny.
She's so naive and just so shocked and just devastated.
Right. And really, you can tell that as much thought as she did put into that question, she maybe didn't consider that, sexual abuse would be something that would come up with regard to these formative associations.
Yeah.
I think she just thought it would be something fun or, interesting.
I did like that Bill nodded at her approvingly with her questions.
Right.
And she did try to use the word us downstairs in the kitchen and got shut down, unfortunately. So there's kind of a subtle theme throughout this episode of Ginny, like, trying to branch out, and she gets shut down, I think, in appropriate places. Because after she and Betty have a conversation, and Betty says, well, Bill's in love with you, Ginny kind of doesn't react well to it, and I think that's why she's so upset with him towards the end of the episode.
Right.
Because she's, oh, I'm so confused about what we're doing exactly. No, she's not. She knows. She's just pissed because it crosses a line, and she thought that this could stay professional and wouldn't have to be something weird. He does have a point that he's worked on this for 20 years, and he's sacrificed years of his life and cultivated gray hairs, in a sense, in order to have the right to carry on these tests. And here she comes, she's however many months into this, and she wants to wear the white coat and get to ask, her own questions. So, in a way, she gets shut down both by circumstance of the answers and by Bill himself. So, it's really kind of a back-off Ginny motif.
Well, and speaking of awesome doctors who engage in a Ginny shutdown, let's talk about Lillian DePaul.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, Lillian DePaul.
I just wrote LDP in my notes, a little heart by it, so.
She is the boss. She is the one in charge. Her coming along, let's see, where do I have this in mind? Yeah, so obviously, it's all really obvious. Ginny thinks they're going to be BFFs. I really think, once again, and this is continuing with this whole theme, Ginny really is in the wrong here. She just told DePaul that WashU is as much as a boys' club as Cornell is, and then she offers to let her have access to the special services that Bill gets as a top male doctor, as if it's some kind of awesome secret gift.
I thought their whole interaction was funny, too, because even earlier, Ginny has been used to having such a warm way with people and sort of being able to make jokes about the hospital and the different procedures and what was it, the specialty she said that she wasn't sure what it involved, phlebotomy?
Oh, yeah.
So, so she was trying to be funny and cute and make this joke, and Lillian DePaul just says, oh, well, that's,
venipuncture.
Exactly. So I kind of liked that as well, because as much as Jenny is used to using her charm, not necessarily to get what she wants, but to get people to appreciate her and like her and see her in a positive light, here comes someone who is cut from the same cloth as Bill and just says, look, you are trying to be my new best friend. You're not a doctor. You don't know how hard I worked to get to this position.
Yeah. And the thing about DePaul not fitting, she's kind of an in-between. She's not really a woman. She doesn't fit in with the secretaries, and she's not really a man because she's kind of in this weird halfway situation.
I thought particularly the scene later on in the secretary pool when DePaul is setting up her office and they're all talking about her. They mentioned that, I think it was Jenny who mentioned in one of Lillian's recommendation letters, the recommending doctor said that if his eyes had been closed, he would not have known she was a woman.
Ugh.
Which,
God, that's a great compliment.
It was just so cringeworthy, and yet, Jenny was rightfully proud of that, because it, here's someone who, like her, has very high ambitions, has medical ambitions, and yet has been able to surmount many obstacles in order to achieve them. So as terrible as it was, you could see Ginny really took a lot of pride in that description and really looked up to DePaul in a way that we haven't seen her look up to a lot of female characters.
Yeah, and I didn't know how far they were going to push the DePaul storyline when she first showed up, because she really does, she kind of comes in and then she disappears for a few episodes, and it's really not clear this early on. You don't get a sense that this is going to be a huge thing down the road, or that Ginny is really going to bond with her in a big way. I thought at the time that DePaul was just going to be kind of a background figure, contrasting the difference between Ginny's situation and her own, as someone who has had to essentially sacrifice her femininity, in a sense, in order to be respected and recognized. Something that I felt was opened up that never got revisited was Dottie, the girl with the glasses. In the brothel, she's unable to, she says she feels absolutely nothing. She has no idea what an orgasm feels like anymore.
That's right.
And I'm like, it's this huge thing, almost like she's anhedonic or something, and it never gets brought up again. I don't know. That's really strange to me, looking back and seeing that. But maybe that's a setup for future events. Maybe that's just something that I noticed, and it doesn't really matter right now. Let's talk about the male participants and Dale.
That is what I was looking at too.
Yeah.
What did you think of Bill's response to meeting Dale and sort of unraveling this small little mystery, because he's talking about the study and how it's a study of sex, and Dale just sort of looks at him and goes, queer sex too?
I really appreciated that Bill was a total fucking champion who watched Dale and Carl get it done.
Well, and that was funny to me too, the way they played that scene, because, Bill, for all his years of knowledge and study about tricks and the female body.
Idea.
He has no idea.
Oh my god. And in today's sex-obsessed culture, how can you not know? But, poor Bill. Poor Bill. No. But he was a champ. He got it done.
He was.
Did it surprise you that Dale tracked down Bill and was seriously interested in homosexuality being a part of the study and kind of offering himself up in a way?
It did. Mainly because I assumed that Dale would be not really threatened by Bill, but just so protective of his identity as a queer person and as, and I won't say out gay character at this point because there is no outing in, 1956, but to the extent that I didn't expect him to want to break that anonymity even further. I guess it did surprise me.
Yeah, I guess he felt like he would have some kind of, he would be able to trust in a doctor figure. Did you see where it was going with Dale telling Bill about Scully?
Oh, as soon as he said member of the medical community, I just knew. I knew that that's where we were going. And
yeah.
So
I think the first time I watched this, I wasn't quite paying close enough attention. So I was surprised when Bill dropped that bomb on Scully, and I was like, oh, wow, okay, yeah. So confirmation. But yeah, on rewatch, it's definitely obvious. Anything else with Dale? We haven't really met him yet. We don't know too much about him. We don't know that he has such a direct and personal connection with Scully. So I kind of feel like there's not too much to say about him at this point. Let's talk about Betty and the operation.
That was just heartbreaking.
Poor Betty. One thing I noted about when they were wheeling her down the hallway and he was asking her to help him get male participants. That was one moment when he had a bit better bedside manner. It wasn't warm and fuzzy in any sense, but his calm, cool nature, it came off as reassuring.
Well, and he, recognized that she was anxious and, held her hand a little bit and tried to bolster her up, which from Bill is
as
reassuring
gesture.
As you can get. That's an A+,
Yeah. And then, of course, his attitude throughout the operation, it surprised me that he seemed to really change his mind. Like in last episode, he was not, initially he was not going to do it, and then he was really reluctant, and she had to blackmail him into it, and she had to embarrass him in the hallway in order to get him to do it, and he just really doesn't want to, and then all of a sudden he's standing up for her and defending her to the other doctors and sending them out of the room. What do you think made him change his mind, and at what point do you think he kind of changed his mind?
Changed his mind about how he saw Betty, or
he goes
the operation?
The operation at least. He goes from being very adamantly against it to standing up for her. I mean, is it more about standing up for her, or is it about how performing the operation reflects on him as a doctor?
I saw it as more standing up for her personally, because it was almost protective in a way that he is protective of his patients, but it was more than that, because, here's these doctors making comments about, we heard she used to be a party girl. He doesn't even give them a warning. He just says, both of you out now. As opposed to maybe in the pilot when they were operating on Mrs. May, his black patient, and the other doctors were saying some racist things. He didn't exactly order them out of the operating room, but then again, he didn't know Mrs. May. She was just a patient who was in the middle of a critical surgery. So to me, I saw that as him being more protective of Betty as a person and not just this woman who is on my operating table.
And I kind of wondered if maybe her reaching out to hold his hand and try and get some kind of feedback from him or some kind of reassurance was what kind of, Or maybe Bill just kind of, I don't know, naturally goes into a really protective, defensive mode when he gets involved in trying to fix a really difficult operation, as he kind of did here. He was very frustrated, and the nurses kind of had to talk him, not talk him off a ledge, but talk him down and kind of talk him out of trying to go on and make it worse than it probably already was.
Yeah, I think I saw it. It was not necessarily, looking at the finish line of the surgery. If I don't tie her tubes back, then, she's not going to do the things that I need her to do for the study. But I think at that point, having had that personal connection with her outside the operating room, he maybe sort of locked into some sort of guilt factor, like, damn it, I am Masters, I should be able to do this. And through these circumstances, he just isn't. So
yeah, I can see that. And then he very gently breaks the news to her, and I think he kind of cloaks himself behind the medical terminology and the seriousness of having to break this news, because, another more touchy-feely doctor would have been, I don't know, I think he has a very rehearsed routine with the "I'm so sorry," like any doctor probably has to when delivering extremely disappointing negative news like that. So,
well, and really, I wasn't paying attention to him during that scene. I was looking at Annalee Ashford just because the way that she'd played that, just, completely silently, but with all of that emotion just in her eyes and in that look, I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, she did really well there. One thing I want to note, obviously we need to go on to talk about Ethan and Libby. When they came back into the brothel before meeting the male prostitutes, when they walked past the black prostitute in the kitchen, she was listening to, I'm pretty sure she was listening to the Tonight Show, which they would like that was, I think that was either I'm not sure if it was Jack Parr or Steve Allen at the time, but they would later be known for being on Johnny Carson's couch multiple times over the next decade. So I think that was kind of a moment of dramatic irony.
That's funny. I didn't recognize that.
There's another instance in this episode where when Libby is watching the movie, and this is later on, it's kind of, the plot of the movie is sort of interesting, but it's a little bit of dramatic irony that the writer stuck in throughout here. Let's talk about Ethan and the quadruplets.
Oh, Ethan.
Well, I don't know. Obviously, he was a dickhead for lying to Scully and not bringing Bill on it. I think the only thing that can really come out of that is Ethan is ambitious to the point of cockiness, and Bill is really bad at PR.
His grimace as he was holding those babies.
Yeah, that was fantastic. And Scully revels in it. He just lolls in the moment. He's just so happy to be there, and Bill is just barely tolerating his own existence at that point. And I think that continues at the end of the episode when Bill has to go to Scully's office. He has this, moment where he's trying to play it totally straight and talk himself up and be like, you should really let me continue this study. I've done so much good work. Look at all the great PR that we got. And Scully's just like, no, don't fuck with me. Why are you coming in here and doing this? And then he has to play his trump card. But even showboating to his friend, mentor, and I would say very definitely, and especially in this episode, father figure, is painful in that scene. It's totally, it's just awful to him. It just comes off as so awkward and strange.
Well, it's awkward, and there's a kind of, not necessarily desperation, but just this intense feeling behind it that, usually he doesn't have to reach for when he's talking about his accomplishments to anyone, but particularly with Scully, who has known him for so long. That conversation, just, there were so many takeaways that I had from it personally, but I think particularly, I guess the part that most resonated with me was whenever Bill sort of slides into the blackmail portion, not necessarily in the cruelest way he can think of, but in the starkest and I guess most emotional appeal that he can muster.
I think it's the most, I think it's loving and it's regretful, but it's with the clear knowledge that if this is what has to be done, then this is what has to be done.
Right. But I just remember his speech and watching Scully's face, as Bill gives it, and watching Bill's face as he sort of trips over these, what I'm sure are rehearsed words, because he's saying, these men aren't degenerates, they're they're family men. They're living a double life.
Yeah.
These are men who are hiding in the shadows, and that just, right in the feels for that. But once again, we skipped from Ethan to Scully and Bill.
Yeah, Ethan is just not interesting in this episode. He acts like an asshole, and there's nothing I can say about him apart from his interactions with Libby. That's the only productive thing that he manages to do all episode.
Yeah, Ethan, I think this episode is just trying to prove himself non-sexually, having failed sexually in the previous episodes. So, what did you think about his interaction with Libby and throughout the episode, but tellingly in their last scene together?
I thought it was funny and awful that so many commenters after this episode aired went, wait, does he mean that he swapped out the sperm donations and that he got Libby pregnant for real?
Oh,
that
God.
Just, like, I don't know. His interactions with Libby were very sweet, and obviously he has a great bedside manner. It is a little chilling to see it contrasted with his grasping nature, otherwise, like sexually and kind of his ambitions professionally, because he comes off as so nice that it's a totally different persona.
Right.
It's kind of creepy.
It is. It's not pudding, but there's a sort of, I would say, ping that goes up whenever you see him in all these different elements, because it's, I don't know. I don't really know how to characterize it, but you're right, it is. There's something almost sinister about it, but that's hidden by the playfulness and just his sort of boyish charm that he puts out to everyone.
So going back to the logical beginning of all of that, what did you think of Gini coming to visit Libby?
It was such an interesting scene to me on a lot of levels, but particularly because you have Libby in the midst of this just total meltdown.
See, I thought she was okay. I thought that the jazz music was an interesting little exclamation point on the end of that. It felt very melodramatic, but her sadness and her feelings of failure felt very real. So I can understand it, but it stuck out to me in a funny way.
Oh, I mean, I don't deny that they were real. They felt genuine, but it was just so jarring and so, for Libby at least, uncomfortable and awkward, because, I mean, me personally, if someone found me in my house like that and then didn't leave right away, I would not be the happiest person in the world. So
yeah.
I thought it was interesting that Gini broke the news to Libby as quickly as she did.
Yeah. Did you think that was going to come back to bite Gini?
I did. I honestly thought that Libby was going to hold that against her, for the rest of their natural lives.
Well, and I kept expecting that to be the thing that would blow up Bill and Ginny's dynamic or relationship later in the season.
Right.
And when it didn't come, I was kind of left hanging, and I'm sort of wondering if it's going to play out later. I don't know. Or if they've just dropped it. It feels kind of strangely anticlimactic.
But it just feels like too big a revelation to be dropped with no reason, It just...
Yeah. Just Ginny's guilt, I guess. But I
well, and especially...
Considering what Gini gets up to otherwise, it's an odd thing to feel so intensely guilty about.
And I think, too, not only the information that she shares, but the fact that it kind of poisons, effectively, Libby's relationship with so many different people in her life that she trusts, because not only is this, the secret that my husband has kept from me for so many years and something I've tortured myself about, this is also a fact that my doctor knows while trying to get me pregnant, knowing I am desperate to have a child, and kept from me. One of the questions I wrote down was, aren't there any kind of medical laws against this?
Not at the time, because HIPAA hadn't come about. There was no consideration of I think, really, maybe there was doctor-patient privilege, but...
Well, and particularly, I mean, male-female relationships and interactions at this time.
Yeah.
Sure, a woman who is not ignorant, but who just has been left out of this loop, they're not going to let her back in anytime soon, so... And
I think this leads to Libby's best Betty Draper impression when Bill comes home, and here's what's really funny. So she's sitting there watching the movie, and it's It Should Happen to You with Peter Lawford and Judy Holliday. But so she's ignoring her husband as he comes in, and he obviously kind of wants to talk to her, and she's acting very cold, and he just sits down and reaches out and kind of starts caressing her, which is the most affection he's shown to her so far.
And that was kind of fascinating to me. later, with the revelations of some of his childhood and family life, that was a marked moment, because it just, you've sort of seen him be, like you said, very dismissive of her. It's not that he doesn't have feelings for her or care about her, but she just sort of exists around the periphery of what he thinks is most important in his life. And then, the second she sort of actively shuts him out, he's there, I know you're upset, it will be better, this is very difficult, blah, blah, blah. And it was funny, but also sad to me.
That's so interesting that you picked up on that aspect of Bill, like instinctively reaching out for love and affection and trying to get her to react when she's so cold, and tying that back to his abuse, because I didn't make that connection at all, but hearing you say that, I think you're absolutely right.
I don't know, it was just one of the things that struck me about that scene, particularly in the rewatch, but even, just watching it a second time, it's not that, it's just the fact that she's actively pushing him away that sort of triggers that reaction. That was very intriguing to me.
She doubles down on the idea of pushing him off, and he kind of, I don't know, not really directly panics, but that's an interesting first reaction, is to reach out even harder.
Right.
So then at the very end, when Bill comes home from work, Libby is all excited. She's completely done a 180 on her emotions.
Chances
She's happy.
are
She's got Johnny Mathis on the hi-fi. So it's been a good day for Libby. Do you think Bill knows right off the bat? Do you think that's existential dread on his face?
I think the second she sits him down and hands him champagne, I think that's when it clicks.
Yeah.
But at that point, I think it's, maybe he has suspicions. Maybe he just isn't sure. Maybe he just thinks, she's glad not to be on bed rest for 18 hours a day. Mm-hmm. But I think it's definitely, you see him move from confusion to acceptance to there's the light bulb.
One thing I have in my notes that, a slight rewind and a slight topic change. So okay. Bill goes off to Scully's office. He comes back. He has the flashback to the really lovely moment with Scully out in New York, where Scully is just totally loving and supportive of him and all of that. And he comes back to his office and he tells Ginny the study's back on. It's going to be here at the hospital. And she doesn't really react after they've had their, this moment where they sort of blow up in a minor way at each other. She's frustrated with him. He lashes out at her. He comes back. It's kind of an interesting moment for him to almost come back defeated and say very quietly that yes, the study is back on. She hardly reacts.
Well, and I honestly thought that was more shock than anything else, because like you said, they just had this argument. He just, from all that she knows, won this big crushing victory for their study by getting it reinstated at the hospital. But at the same time, here he comes with this sort of hangdog, dazed look. And Ginny being Ginny, it felt like she picked up on that something was very wrong, but she just had no idea what, and therefore couldn't react.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I got the feeling that she filed it away for later. I feel like she's always filing away little things for later.
She's an observer of people, our Ginny.
So is there anything else that we want to talk about? I would love to spend a couple of minutes talking about the season 2 trailer that was released recently, today.
Let's go.
Yes, so I think from what we can piece together, I think, and obviously spoilers for the trailer, and I think spoilers for the first few episodes of season 2, I think they're really playing a strong hand here in revealing exactly what's going on. And I'm wondering if it's going to be an issue of consent.
Interesting.
Because it kind of felt violent and very sudden, and he's behind her, and it's just this very, I don't know, shocking kind of motion. And then, of course, it gets into the study's back on. Virginia's back involved in it. Libby knows about that. And then, obviously, Bill and Virginia are carrying on their study in a hotel under fake names. And there's so much of this back and forth. This is hard to pick apart. The one thing that stuck out to me, though, was towards the end of the trailer when he reaches over, because she talks about how, yeah, we can just have an affair, or we can use this in the study, and what we have between us is we have this work, and that's so much more important. Did you get the sense from that it's kind of Ginny having to negotiate in a way to sort of talk him down in a sense?
I don't know if I saw it as her having to talk him down, but what really registered with me was the dynamic that we see play out in all of season 1, where really, as much as you have Jenny saying, I can separate sex from emotions. I, am the geeks who, doesn't have to worry about feelings. And then here's Bill Masters who, king of compartmentalization, by episode 2 is just not necessarily out of his mind with lust for Jenny, but there's definitely something that has affected him in a primal way. And so I thought that was a nice callback to that dynamic, that you have him just saying, we could have this affair, and really having these passionate moments with her.
I just can't decide if I think I think it's gonna turn into they're kind of using each other in a sense. Like he's using her for comfort because he's gonna be very stressed out in season 2. He doesn't have a job. He's got a brand new kid he doesn't want.
Tiny child here all the time.
Tiny child here all the time. Is not he needs some kind of an escape, really and truly. And I think Ginny is going to be willing to run back to him because she is not respected. She's not taken seriously. She's being propositioned, as we've seen in another trailer. But I kind of wonder if she isn't putting and what I mean by talk him down is whether she's trying to put some distance between them by saying, well, look, I'll do this, enthusiastically, but only if we use it for study data, because that way she can put a buffer between herself and still sort of detach in a sense, because he's played his hand essentially if the words I can't live without you mean anything.
That's pretty clear. But yeah, I agree that it seems like Ginny is still trying to detach herself even in those new circumstances and saying, well, we have the study, we have the work, and that's really what's most important here, and not necessarily your need for escape or my needs of any sort. She really does seem to be trying to establish a boundary or, a line maybe that isn't crossed.
And the BuzzFeed article that was accompanying this has, I don't know, I think this is kind of editorializing. It says that Virginia is kind of calling the shots on saying that, well, this sexual relationship starts and stops with our libidos, and that's it. Like, this can't bleed out. And I don't know that I really got that. I'm not sure. I need to see it contextually, but I
don't know if she sees it as just sexual, but I do think that's the major component of it.
Yeah.
Obviously they do a sort of meeting of the minds in their relationship, but, the study, I think, is first and foremost to her as far as their participation in it together and wherever that may lead them personally and not just professionally. So I don't know.
Well, I got in my talk about the trailer. I am super excited based on the footage. I think this show is going to be even more embarrassing to watch over at my friend's house than it usually is. This was the episode where I started to question whether or not my friend would still let me come over to use her Showtime connection, because you listen to these prostitutes screaming and making all this noise and you're like, this is a make or break moment. Like, either this is going to get me shut out or we're going to be friends for a while after this. And I think we're okay.
Extensive lingering on people's orgasm faces.
Yes, exactly.
Not awkward at all.
Okay, so that concludes this podcast, and we'll be back next time to talk about episode 4.
We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.